Seems every couple of months, if not weeks, we get some kind of announcement about a video game remaster, remake or reboot. I mean, in 2025 alone, we've got the upcoming Metal Gear Solid Delta, along with remasters and enhanced editions for Tomb Raider and Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, as well as a new trailer for Bungie's reboot for Marathon. And since the reception to that trailer seemed to be pretty mixed, I thought it might be fun to go back and take a look at a bunch of other reboots we've had throughout the years. Some good, some bad, and some in between. Now, this isn't going to be any kind of definitive list, and obviously my definition of what makes for a good or bad reboot, or just a reboot in general, is going to differ to yours. But in most of these cases, I'm just going to be looking at updates to much older franchises in series, which is the main point of the video.
You got that?
Sound good? Right, let's get into it. Right, before I get too far into things though, I do have to thank G2A for sponsoring this video. Now, G2A is your one-stop shop for all digital entertainment, the so-called gateway to adventure, offering a whole variety of products from software and video games through to gift cards for Amazon and Netflix. But what they're easily best known for is being an easy and reliable source for game keys at a discounted price, with the benefit of a cheaper cost, but also instant delivery. With there being a whole range of stuff on offer as well, with recent titles like Monster Hunter Wilds, through to older games like Deus Ex Human Revolution. Yeah, that game is considered retro now. And this kind of thing is really becoming more important, given the rising costs of video games these days, making a site like G2A a welcome alternative over the expensive prices you get with some of the other platforms. You can even sign up to their newsletter to make sure you don't miss out on any updates or upcoming deals. What they're doing this month is a whole PC port promotion focusing on games that were originally on the consoles but have now been ported over, with things like Ghost of Tsushima, Red Dead Redemption 2, and The Last of Us Part 2. So if you were like me and found trying to shoot someone on the PS4 with The Last of Us 2 to be about as smooth as doing calligraphy with a crayon, well, now you've got the benefit of improved aiming with a mouse and keyboard. Goody gumdrops.
Cool.
As well as a whole bunch of customization options when it comes to getting this thing running on a PC to begin with. So make sure to click the link in the video description to check out the range and pick one of these games up. And yeah, once again, thanks to G2A for sponsoring this video. Now, the old Commander Keen games are really some of the all-time best DOS classics, and in fact, I'm pretty sure that first episode is one of the first games I ever played on a computer. It really was one of the examples of the PC's answer to the 8 and 16-bit console platforming craze of the early 1990s, where in lieu of things like Super Mario Bros., we had stuff like Jill of the Jungle, Cosmo's Cosmic Adventure, Duke Nukem, and Commander Keen. And it was kinda hard to not be enticed by the whole premise. I mean, it's a game where you're playing as a kid who doesn't want to go to bed. So instead, while the babysitter is asleep and his parents are out for the night, he heads out in his own custom-made spaceship to go and fight aliens on Mars. With that fourth episode, Goodbye Galaxy absolutely being a standout. I mean, you had levels set in villages, snow and ice-filled caves, an oasis, along with a bunch of mysterious pyramids. Plus, it was one of the first games I remember playing that had full-on Sound Blaster support. Not to mention that underwater stage that introduced the iconic Dope Fish, which really became one of PC gaming's best-running gags throughout the next decade. All up, it was hands down one of the most memorable franchises from the early 90s, more so because it was developed by id Software, and myself, along with a whole bunch of other people, no doubt look back on these games fondly. Which meant that any kind of remake, update, or sequel would probably be welcomed, especially if it kept things in line with the originals. And in 2019, Bethesda Softworks announced they were doing just that. Only for some reason, they decided to make it a mobile-only game where you didn't even play as Commander Keen himself, you played as his kids, Billy and Billy. Also being free to play, along with having mechanics which were nothing in line with the original, with a bizarre new art style that didn't even match the series' tone at all. And it's really weird to think that they created this modern, cartoonish aesthetic like they're trying to appeal to younger gamers, but in reality, the only people who'd be remotely interested in this stuff are going to be the older ones, who really would have preferred it to look more in line with its roots.
No,
he's got a point.
Either way, it really seems that someone at Bethesda took the hint, because after some insane backlash and supposed internal testing, developers seemed to stop and the whole thing just disappeared. I mean, they never explicitly explained it as far as I know, but it's pretty damn clear the whole thing just got shut down. The Twitter account that posted updates just went completely dead, and that official website is offline as well.
Good.
All of which is probably for the best. Still though, as bad as it looked, I can't imagine it would have been any crappier than King Dreams. And I just don't know what they were thinking, going from a game where you shot aliens with a laser blaster to one where you run around throwing seed pods at evil vegetables to temporarily turn them into flowers.
It's true, but he shouldn't say it.
Anyway, next up is a reboot that's been done properly, and that's Eidos Montreal's Deus Ex Human Revolution, released back in 2011. Technically a prequel to the original Deus Ex, but then also a bit of a reboot as well, breathing new life into the dormant franchise since that lukewarm reception that the second game got. And all up, a pretty damn good update to that original formula.
Because that's what's really important, isn't it?
The story itself takes place before the events in the first game, where you're now playing as a dude named Adam Jensen, working as a security manager at a huge augmentation company named Sarif Industries. Adam's girlfriend Megan is a researcher who's found a way for people whose body rejects augmentations to now actually accept them, without having to rely on an expensive drug named neuropoison. However, during the prologue sequence, she's kidnapped by the Illuminati, and then Adam is seriously wounded, like, yeah, more or less to within an inch of his life.
CT probe shows the bullet caused severe hematoma.
With the whole smorgasbord of augmentations from Sarif being the only thing that keeps him alive. Yeah, he never asked for this, by the way.
I never asked for this.
When he's finally recovered, he then goes from the realistically crime-ridden streets of Detroit to China, Montreal, and then back to Detroit, uncovering the plot that almost got him killed and uncovering the Illuminati's real agenda.
Get rid of him, Barrett!
And much like the original game, there's a bunch of key themes here that have been revisited, like the whole transhumanism element, along with the moral implications of humans extending their life through technology.
Only one way to find out.
Roger that.
There's again a similar class divide between people who can afford these augments and those who can't, with all the best stuff available to the rich and elite, while the poor are forced to live in squalor. And it even centers around a drug that's used to control everything. Now in Deus Ex, it was ambrosia, a vaccine for the man-made virus, the Great Death. And then here in Human Revolution, it's neuropoison, the drug that people with augmentations are forced to take to avoid that unfortunate side effect of dying.
They caused me to, die.
Plus, it's almost a RoboCop reboot as well, being about a former cop in Detroit who's brought back from the brink and turned into a cyborg. But what's best about Human Revolution is that it brings back all the open-ended gameplay mechanics from the first game, where you can choose to go in guns blazing or sneak around, skulking through vents or popping from cover to cover to avoid being seen, even though really the game more or less incentivizes you to stay hidden, due to the fact that you get far more XP from just leaving enemies alone. And then some of the returning abilities like the cloak just make this even easier.
Nothing yet. He's around here somewhere.
I mean, combat is a possibility, maybe on the normal difficulty mode, but you die really quickly here, and it's kind of easy for enemies to gang up on you when you're detected. Compared to the first game, where you could easily get through the whole thing with a combat approach. Here though, it's just not always possible. It's also packed with all that really fun, immersive sim kind of shit, like being able to move crates and boxes around to clear a path, breaking down weakened walls to create shortcuts, along with hacking into every single possible computer system you can get your little robotic fingers on.
Access granted.
A lot of people criticise the visuals on this thing, considering it came out during the peak of the whole piss filter era. And yeah, like, while that might be true in the sense that it does look like someone took a piping hot piss across the screen, this is still a gorgeous game artistically, and I think in that regard, it hasn't aged a day. I still think the animations for the various takedowns are brutal and really impressive to watch, and there's something so funny about Adam tapping someone on the shoulder to get their attention before just sucker punching him in the face as hard as he can.
I guess you didn't see that, did you?
Even the dialogue and the persuasion stuff is deeply improved, with it now being about reading someone's responses and trying to steer the conversation in a way that you can control.
So obvious.
Can't believe I didn't see it till now!
The only objective issue this one has is those original boss fights, which outright forced you into combat. And if you didn't have a lethal weapon with you, or you weren't spec'd that way, well, then you were pretty much more or less just fucked. Now, the so-called Director's Edition did fix this, kind of, by adding in non-lethal options for these encounters, but then that version also includes the awful Missing Link DLC by default, which was a completely standalone experience towards the end of the original campaign that just totally messed up the pacing.
It was a bad situation.
Still though, this is one of those games that I come back to at least once or twice a year just to replay through for funsies, and one that I still play through exactly the same way every single time. I don't know, it's like putting on a comfy pair of jeans or an old hoodie. It's just one of those things you can sink right back into and watch the time pass you by. And if only Mankind Divided hadn't been a so-called sales bomb, then we might have got a third game out of these guys.
I never asked for this.
Now, the original Golden Axe is hands down one of the best of the old school arcade 2D side-scrolling beat-em-ups. And when it got ported to the Mega Drive, it also became one of the staples of the platform as far as two-player games went. In fact, I still remember playing through this thing with my sister when we got the console for Christmas one year, along with Streets of Rage and Revenge of Shinobi. It's just an all-time classic where you choose to play as either Axe Battler, Gilius Thunderhead, or Tyrus Flare, fighting back against droves of enemies to defeat a warlord named Death Adder, who's trying to take over some kind of fictional kingdom. You had mountable beasts you could hop onto and control, there was different magic spells for each character, and a basic but robust combat system. So yeah, what a great idea it was to reboot the whole thing all those years later in 3D, and remove the co-op aspect entirely, instead making it a solo game where you've only got to play as Tyrus Flare. Talking of course about Golden Axe Beast Rider in 2008, developed by Secret Level Inc. Now we'll say if nothing else, the story in this one is at least kinda similar to the original. Death Adder's back again, and in a complete dick move, has wiped out all of Tyrus's people, the Sisters of Fire, who she now has to go off and avenge. With Gilius and Axe Battler also making a return, though sadly you don't actually get to play as these guys.
By my balls, girl! I thought you were dead!
You can still ride beasts around and even still cast spells, along with collecting extra health and mana from those little goblin things. And the whole thing should have been awesome, only every single other aspect of this reboot is completely fucking awful. The combat, for instance, now revolves around this whole mechanic of parrying and evading, where you parry blue attacks and evade the orange ones, which sounds like it makes sense, but in reality it seldom seems to work. Because you're quite often being swarmed by half a dozen enemies at once, making it really tricky to consistently track what kind of attacks are coming. You have to do this as well because your basic attacks do bugger all damage, but attacking after a successful evade or parry does bonus damage, making it essential to deal with the bigger groups. Which also means you end up waiting for people to attack so you can either evade or parry them. Every now and then you can kick someone into a bunch of spikes, but really, that's about it. Oh yeah, and as for the eponymous Golden Axe, well, that thing's in here and is supposed to be some kind of super powerful artifact, only you can't even equip it normally. Instead, all you do is just throw it around at these preset areas to destroy magical barriers. A lot of the enemies are also just so tedious to deal with. Like all the spellcasters who just hang back at a distance and fire projectiles, with the worst one being these variants that just drop boulders on you from the sky pretty much incessantly. But I think the worst thing is how much this game relies on the beast during combat. And yes, I know that it has Beast Rider in the title, and also that the original games did the same thing, but nowhere near the degree that it is here. Because it seems you can't go for longer than 30 seconds without having to hop onto the back of another one of these stupid things and lug it around, which would be fine if they didn't control like a semi-trailer that's missing its back wheels. And honestly, it's really hard to overstate just how crappy these things control. And the ease at which enemies can knock you off them is just so annoying. I mean, if nothing else, at least that's keeping it in line with the original. Trying to fight other enemies who are riding beasts is super frustrating too, and trying to knock them off, especially if you're on foot, is even worse. It also seems like a lot of the beast abilities are also kind of redundant. Like, one of them has the option to go into a Predator-style cloak mode, but this is really only used like 2 or 3 times in the entire game at very specific points. But I'd say the thing that pisses me off the most here are the constant cutscenes. And it seems every time you hit a switch or activate something, it has to pause the gameplay to show you this 10-second long cutscene of what you just opened. Yeah, every single time. As if the developers thought the player was a drooling moron that needed everything spoon-fed to them directly.
What was the point of all that?
Overall, I'd say it's not only one of the worst reboots I've ever played, but also just one of the worst games I've ever played in general. And there's a reason why there was never another Golden Axe game after this. I mean, this thing could have revived the franchise, man, but instead it killed it off. It's kind of weird too, how this thing really was the style back at the time. Back in the early and mid 2000s, where whenever we got some kind of a remake or a reboot or like a sequel to a 16-bit game, the tendency was just to make the whole thing fully 3D. I mean, we saw it with Bubsy, Altered Beast, and Shinobi, which we'll get to soon enough. And I think it's kind of funny because nowadays we've got the complete opposite, where updates and sequels are instead getting the 2D treatment, as was the case with Streets of Rage 4 and then the upcoming Shinobi game. On a positive note, I will say that the vibe of this one is at least pretty cool. I mean, it's got that whole Frank Frazetta / heavy metal comics thing going on, where it's set in this mythical, made-up fantasy land where all the male characters are super muscly and juiced up, and then all the female characters are these super hot babes in skimpy outfits. And yeah, dog, truly one of the best aspects to Beast Rider in that regard is how Tyrus changes her outfit at the beginning of each area. And even though she looks like a combination of Lilu from The Fifth Element and the girl from the Crazy Town Butterfly music video, it's hard to not enjoy the basic visual spectacle of playing as a fit-looking smoke show running around in a revealing outfit. You can even unlock her original outfit from the arcade version once you beat the game, even though that's still not enough motivation for me to want to do so. All up, this whole thing is exactly what I'd expect from the guys who made the Dreamcast port for Unreal Tournament.
By my balls, girl!
However, all of that pales in comparison to what Volition Inc. did in 2022 with the Saints Row reboot.
Hey. Fucking loser. Okay, that's not good.
Which not only seemed to kill off that series, but also basically Volition as well, as the company shut down shortly after the game's release. Now, the first and probably most telling aspect that this was going to be complete garbage was how it was more or less an origin story for the Saints, only replacing all those iconic characters with a new roster of obnoxious millennials and Gen Zs.
You're fun.
Hey man, just being real.
Who, despite being added in to appeal to a younger demographic, still made dated and cringy references to old internet memes and culture.
And posted. Oh look, I already got a like.
And it just felt like there was no edge to any of this stuff, with all the main characters seeming like they'd been designed by a focus group.
Can I have a white wine spritzer?
Along with the random members of the Saints gang now looking like the type of people who'd be making coffee at 6 AM in the morning to pay off a liberal arts degree.
Hey, the wage slave is back.
More than that though, it was an absolutely horrendous game when it came to the technical stuff, with countless bugs, glitches and other performance issues. Like fire hydrants, propelling vehicles up into the air. Oh yeah, here we go. Whack! Holy shit. You got countless physics and ragdoll stuff-ups, not to mention the animation just frequently shitting its pants. I still remember how one of the missions had the audacity to put in an insult at Todd Howard at one point.
How does that work?
It works.
Yeah, but how?
It just works.
Yeah, in the same game where you've got stuff like this happening. Oh yeah, and don't even get me started on that character creator. I mean, this thing had some of the most munted faces I think I've ever seen. And these weren't faces you got by random, these are some of the presets put in there by the developer. I also remember how broken the co-op mode was around launch as well, where they're just randomly kicking people from a match all the time. Yeah, because they've been so careful, son. What? Oh, what happened there? Not to mention there being a super weird bug there where it replaced all the cars on the road with idle people.
I have no one in the cars that you're hitting. Like, there's no driver in the car.
What am I hitting?
You're hitting cars on my screen.
Bro, on my screen I'm hitting pedestrians. Gameplay-wise, the new map also felt so open and empty, with barely any NPC activity at all, and the whole thing just felt so soulless. All the other Saints Row games use Volition's own in-house engine, something called the CTG engine, which really gave them their own unique look and feel.
That was enjoyable.
Whereas the reboot just opts for the Unreal Engine 4, which totally removed the game's sense of identity.
So, is this how it's gonna be every time we have to pay rent?
And while it is true that the Saints Row series might have lost its way a bit towards the end there, especially with games like Gat Out of Hell, all of that stuff looks like a masterpiece in comparison to what happened with this reboot. So yeah, man, like there's a reason why this pretty much ended Volition as a development studio. It sold bad, it scored bad, and all of that is completely justified. And any game that unironically mentions privilege during dialogue deserves to fail.
Smells like privilege in here.
Shame.
Now the Shinobi series is another one of those franchises that I've found myself playing for the better part of 3 decades now. As far back as that original game at the arcades, along with Shadow Dancer, Revenge of Shinobi, and then Shinobi 3 on the Mega Drive. Yeah, easily some of the best and toughest titles we ever got on that platform, with Revenge of Shinobi in particular still kicking my ass all these years later. In Revenge, the story is you're playing as a badass ninja named Joe Musashi, going up against the evil Neo-Zed Corporation. Basically just means you're going around throwing shurikens at everyone from a distance, as you make your way through 8 different stages, with each main stage ending in a boss fight. And then in Shinobi 3, it was basically just an update to the formula, keeping the same amount of levels along with adding in a bunch of new mechanics, like being able to run, wall jump, jump kick, as well as riding a horse and a surfboard. And although there was a follow-up to this on the Sega Saturn with Shinobi Legions, I'd argue that when people think about the series, it's usually back to these couple of games in the early 90s on the Mega Drive. It wasn't until 2002 when they finally rebooted the series with the aptly named Shinobi on the PlayStation 2. Developed by Overworks, which was even comprised of people who worked on those original games. This time you're no longer playing as Joe Musashi, instead it's a dude named Hotsuma, the last surviving member of the Oboro clan, which is the same one that Musashi was with in the previous games. With the plot being that there's some kind of demonic attack in Tokyo, with all these other shinobi being revived and turned evil, leaving it up to our boy Hotsuma to stop the whole thing.
Their deaths shall be avenged by my blade. I do not need your help.
And overall, like, it's a pretty cool plot, and the setting of this futuristic, dystopic Tokyo makes a perfect backdrop. Not to mention, it's like basically a scientific fact at this point that ninjas and cyberpunk go hand in hand. With the gameplay involving running around these now fully 3D environments, cutting things up with your katana and then occasionally throwing shurikens. There's a dash move in there as well, handy for avoiding hits, but also getting behind enemies, because attacking something up the arse does more damage. As well as those powerful ninjutsu moves returning from the previous games, though again you probably want to save these things for the boss fights. They've even got that same jump move where you can throw out a bunch of shurikens in an arc, hitting everything around you.
Again, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme.
Which is also doubly effective here because shurikens stun enemies. And just like the older games, the format is even kinda similar, with there still being 8 stages all up, and each stage comprised of 3 levels, with the third one always being the boss fight. The new gimmick they've added in is Hotsuma's demonic katana, which constantly needs to be topped up with the souls of your enemies, or else it's eventually going to start to drain your health bar.
If left unfed, Akujiki will eat away at its wielder's soul.
And this is at least a pretty cool mechanic in the sense that it puts a sense of urgency on each of the levels, as you really got to work your way through them as fast as possible. In fact, if you can even kill enough enemies in quick succession, you get this really cool little cutscene where Hotsuma stands there as they all fall to pieces at the same time. Yeah, it's that classic ninja trope we've seen in practically every form of media by this point. Here they call it the Tate system, not to be confused with Andrew Tate, where the only system that bloke's got is appealing to 14-year-old self-confessed alphas. So all up, I don't think Shinobi is a bad reboot, but it does very quickly start to get repetitive and just kinda boring. Simply because for pretty much every level, it's just running into the same looking arenas over and over, as a bunch of enemies spawn in for you to kill. Then once you've dealt with all of them, a barrier blocking the exit disappears and you go into the next one to do the same thing all over again. Yeah, goody gumdrops. For one of the stages, the entire ground is covered in all these spider webs which sap your movement, and getting through this area is just painful. Plus, I gotta say, I haven't seen a floor this sticky since the morning after your mum and I broke in a new Sibian machine.
Perhaps this is our destiny.
This also comes from that era where video game cameras really seem to have a personal grudge against the player, and the camera in this thing is absolutely AIDS-inducing at times. That is to say that you are gonna get AIDS from playing this game. The aerial enemies are probably the trickiest because it's so hard to pinpoint where they're even coming from at times, but it's at its worst during some of the boss fights, where the boss is going to frequently relocate itself, making it really hard to keep track of where they're going because the camera just has a mind of its own. I feel like the Ninja Gaiden games on the Xbox did this thing properly with the whole semi-fixed camera system. And while it wasn't always perfect, like at least Team Ninja had the good sense to at least zoom the whole thing out, so you can at least see the hazards that were all around you. The main concept here with the boss fights is you're supposed to charge up the katana by killing all of the fodder enemies, and then use that charged up attack on the boss to deal out a bunch of damage. Only the charge drops off within seconds, and if you can't reach the boss in time to hit them because, you can't see where they are, well then all of this is just going to be for nothing. I also think it's kind of weird for a game like this that there's no block move, which seems like something they just forgot to include. I mean, even Shinobi 3 had a block move. And it would have really benefited this reboot as well. Instead of forcing the player to mash the dodge button over and over like it owes them money. This thing's also notorious for being a really hard game, and yeah, while that is true, it is also hard for the wrong reasons.
Welcome!
Mainly because there's no checkpoints here at all, and if you die at any time, it throws you back to the beginning of the current stage. Honestly though, I don't think that's a humongous issue, but it is definitely kinda lame, considering that even Shinobi 3 on the Mega Drive would at least have checkpoints throughout the levels around the halfway mark. So overall though, not a bad reboot and far from a bad game, but yeah, one that doesn't quite feel like the originals it's based off. So people who want a reboot closer in line with those older entries should probably check out the one on the 3DS.
I shall have my revenge.
Up next is the Thief reboot from 2014, which, much like the Shinobi one, isn't a bad game. But this one, however, is absolutely a bad Thief game.
He speaks a lot of sense. Fucking rarity in this place.
Without going into too much detail here, the first Thief game, The Dark Project, really was one of the pioneers for the 3D stealth genre, along with Metal Gear Solid and the first Tenchu, where you got to play as the cynical master thief Garrett.
It's a throne room. How pretentious can you get?
And being one of the earliest examples of a stealth game that emphasized staying hidden, by sticking to the shadows and trying to avoid detection.
Who goes?
There was originally 3 games released, with the third one, Deadly Shadows, coming out in 2004, which is often regarded as being the weakest. That is at least until the reboot came out. And even behind the scenes, this reboot was just plagued with drama, like the rumours of there being constant restarts for the development cycle, along with the reports of there being a high staff turnover within Eidos Montreal at the time. And what we ultimately got was a game where it didn't feel like they could decide if they wanted to focus on combat or stealth, so they instead just decided to half-ass both. And the whole thing just never really feels like a Thief game. I mean, there's no keepers, there's no pagans, no mechanists, or no builders.
This is bullshit!
And it's just this generic looking Victorian city that you'd hardly even know was supposed to be steampunk inspired. The old games had elements of the Industrial Revolution, but then there were also magical and medieval aspects as well, and there's still never really been anything like it since. Plus, it didn't really help either that Garrett often felt sidelined in his own game, with most of the new story being focused on a side character named Eren. Now, this is Garrett's former protege who went down a more violent path and ended up becoming an assassin.
Why'd you kill this guard? He was barely older than you.
only to be reunited with him during the prologue and then caught up in some kind of weird magical ritual that ends up turning her into this omniscient being.
Garrett, I'm slipping! Ah!
Who's also then partly responsible for a plague that befalls the city. Garrett then returns to the city a year later with no recollection of what's happened or where he's been for the past 12 months, and with all the king's horses and all the king's men, has to put all the pieces back together again.
It was time for you to return home.
There's another antagonist who looks like Daniel Day-Lewis's character from Gangs of New York, and this bloke also highlights another tonally jarring element in the reboot, which is the use of profanity.
And for my men to do what they're fucking told.
Especially considering that this is a series where the most offensive thing people have ever called each other is taffers.
How's it going?
I don't know, it just feels like they included all the crap they thought they had to include for a video game made in the mid-2000s. Like having all these dark and edgy characters, as well as of course the whole focus mode, where you can highlight objects of interest in the environment. I mean, just that shit right there that magically scans the area to show you all the important stuff is the most 2000s game mechanic of all time. Missions can even be replayed as often as you want to get a better result, which is the complete opposite of the very linear and narrative-focused approach to missions in the old games. But what I really hated about this one was how there was contextual animations for every single fucking action in the game, especially for looting. And how you have to repeatedly watch Garrett go through drawers and cupboards, even the empty ones, which just makes the whole looting process incredibly tedious. More so too because most of the stuff you find is only worth a few pieces of gold. I mean, not to toot my own horn, but I think I summed it up best in my old review, where I said he feels more like a master thief and instead like a petty thief.
Nice piece. It should find a good price if no one knows where it's been.
Even the stealth takedowns are now these full-on scripted, unskippable animations of Garrett taking someone out, with the air takedowns in particular looking like something out of a Batman game. And it's like, whatever happened to just whacking someone over the back of the head with the blackjack and calling it a day?
Is that me?
Stealth has been simplified quite a bit here as well, especially with the surfaces you move across. I mean, the old games, for instance, had like 6 or 7 different kinds, from grass, wood and stone through to tile and gravel. In the reboot though, it's really just either you're walking on something that makes noise or you're not. Rope arrows are also greatly simplified, only able to be used at specific spots, and the moss arrows are just gone entirely. But then what's even weirder is when the game goes out to a third-person perspective when you're climbing. But by far the thing that sticks out the most are all the new combat moves, where you can easily take out most enemies by just smacking them with the blackjack in the face over and over. Boink! Eventually even unlocking an ability where you can knock out enemies in a single hit, completely removing the threat of being detected, which just goes against everything the series is about. I mean, when you're seen in these games, or ideally any stealth game, you should have to run away and hide, not stand and fight. And if you're standing your ground in a thief game, well then something's gone horribly wrong. To be fair though, like I will say that yet again, there are some really awesome little immersive sim moments here and there. Like being able to distract enemies with breakable items or shooting out light switches from a distance with your bow. I really love the idea of feeling around the sides of bookshelves or frames to find hidden switches, and that whole mechanic of cutting out paintings with a scalpel is also a nice touch.
Good find.
One of the earlier missions set inside an opium den is also pretty damn awesome. We can bypass that stealth mechanic entirely by sabotaging the opium tank and just putting everyone to sleep.
I've said too much.
There's even a mission set inside an asylum, and although it can't hold a candle to the Shellbridge Cradle in Deadly Shadows, the whole thing has a really unsettling vibe.
You shouldn't be here.
Along with some creepy deformed enemies the player has to deal with. I also remember a lot of people hating this scripted chase sequence as well, but I've always thought that this was kinda cool. And Garrett stopping to dryly wish the City Watch a good evening just after bursting through a skylight is really the most Garrett thing ever.
Evening.
Cool!
And I mean, at least he's running away during all of this, he's not standing and fighting, which is way more in line with his character. Plus, they don't call it the Thieves' Highway for nothing. visually too, the whole thing does look pretty fantastic, especially with some of the lighting effects. And it's also great that it's a game that runs in the Unreal Engine 3, but somehow manages to not look like it at all.
I don't have time for this.
Still though, at the end of the day, this one really just can't compare to the originals. And what's also not helping is just how memorable that original Garrett was. I mean, the new one is just so unremarkable, which ain't entirely the voice actor's fault, but just the downside of having to follow on after Steven Russell, who was hands down one of the most iconic voice actors from the 1990s.
Sounds like they could use a third party to settle their disagreement.
Oh yeah, and speaking of audio, the sound design in this is still absolutely fucked, even 10 years after release, with the sound mixing frequently glitching out.
Garrett? Garrett, I'm slipping! Ah!
This is your city too?
Well, that was fucking dreadful.
Again, something in stark contrast to the brilliant and ageless sound design in the originals. But you know what? The long and short of it is that we had a really good Thief reboot before this thing came out anyway. Yeah, in a game called Dishonored. And while that might have had a whole lot of combat options, some of them broken, I'd say it did a far better job of capturing the tone and feel of the original Thief games than this reboot ever did.
It's true, but he shouldn't say it.
This reboot could have ushered in a new series of games for the franchise, but instead, it fired a broad-headed arrow into its temple and made sure that no one ever touched it again. What a damn shame. But on the subject of 90s games brought into the 2000s, we've got the final game in the video with 2008 Turok, developed by Propaganda Games. And with this one, it's kind of like someone saw that the old Turok games had dinosaurs in them, and then just based this entire reboot off that factor alone and nothing else. And what was once a visually varied fantasy/sci-fi shooter, where you travel to different dimensions and realms, was now replaced with a grey and dull military shooter, replacing expansive non-linear levels with regenerating health and poorly disguised corridors. Getting rid of stuff like the cerebral bore and instead just being a bore in general. You like that one? Also compared to the original games, where Turok was a mantle handed down to different warriors, all tasked with defending Earth from invading forces, now just playing as a guy simply named Joseph Turok. Yeah, Joe Turok.
Now I want you to meet Turok.
Who's instead just some kind of special forces soldier hunting down his former mentor, joining up with this squad who are all just a pastiche of soldier cliches. Like you got the edgy guy, the smartass, and then the shouting sergeant who barks orders.
Alright, meeting's over. Let's get ready to roll.
And edgy really being the best way to sum up the whole tonal theme they've got going on here, with all this stuff like Joseph executing dinosaurs with his knife. And the shooting being little more than just running around these mostly linear environments, shooting the same few dinosaurs or enemy soldiers over and over.
That's a shame.
In Turok 2 alone, you've got cool shit like the mag sec, the shredder, the plasma rifle, and the razor wind. Then in the reboot, you've got a pistol, the SMG, and a shotgun. Okay. Now compared to Thief, Turok is an Unreal Engine 3 game that absolutely looks like an Unreal Engine 3 game. And at a glance, you could easily mistake this thing for Gears of War if you squinted your eyes hard enough. Also having a horrifically low FOV, which, on the plus side, does have some hilarious results if you end up trying to modify it to go any higher.
Our target is Roland Kane, leader of the legendary Wolf Pack. 3 years ago, Kane went AWOL. No one's seen or heard from him since.
But what is crazy is how that game genuinely looks worse off artistically than the old ones do. That is to say that games that came out like a decade earlier still look more appealing and varied than this thing does. I mean, at least those games had some sense of variety and tried to mix things up level to level, instead of using the same green or grey colour palette ad nauseum. Not to mention they got rid of Ada and those ridiculously sized bluish grey alien knockers, which few people actually know is the source of the blue milk that Luke Skywalker drinks in Star Wars.
Liar!
On a positive note, like the dinosaurs are animated well, I guess. I don't know. Who gives a shit?
I got a way out here.
I think ultimately the game's other downfall is that it had the unfortunate timing of coming out in 2008, which for a first-person shooter means you're going up against some pretty stiff competition. I mean, you're competing against World at War, Far Cry 2 and Crisis Warhead. Not to mention, a year before that we had Modern Warfare, Halo 3 and Bioshock. So it's no surprise that this thing bombed more than my intestines do after ingesting a few too many bowls of turkey chili, with it also being the end for propaganda games. But the funny thing about this one is that the series is getting another reboot soon as well, with the upcoming Turok Origins developed by Saber Interactive. But if the early footage and gameplay they've showed is any indicator, well then that's going to end up in a part 2 of this video if I ever end up doing one, because yeah, that reboot doesn't look that good at all. Either way though, that about rounds things out. I know there's a whole bunch of other series I probably could have talked about here, like Wolfenstein, Tomb Raider, God of War, or even Doom. So if you can think of any other games you'd like to see me talk about, well then drop it in the comments section below and maybe I can take a look at it in a future video. Maybe. Still, I hope this has been an entertaining and maybe a nostalgic trip down memory lane. And remember, as bad as some of these might be, at least none of them changed up their genre entirely to a PvP extraction shooter that no one asked for. So yeah, they got that going for them.